Okay, cool. So welcome to today's session. I think we talked about last week, and Adam's put some really good questions in the chat over the week as well, hasn't he? Unfortunately, can't make it today. But just some of the challenges that I think people are interested in regards to launching online learning, converting over to online learning, and perhaps some of the whether it's from an assessment perspective. So obviously Jackie and Linda will be, your input from the EPAO perspective would be really helpful. And then also from a delivery perspective as well, Christine, particularly, I guess, your expertise around functional skills would be really interesting. And then Paul, what you've learned from a provider perspective as well. I'm obviously massively biased in this topic, so I'm going to try and keep my mouth shut.
But you're all for paper, Erica, I know.
Yeah, I could be the cheerleader for online learning, so I'm not going to try and get too involved in this conversation because I genuinely want to understand more about some of the challenges, which is really where Adam was coming from, I think, wasn't it? So rather than just kind of selling it in all the time. So is that all right for everybody?
Yeah, fine.
Yeah, okay, fab. So looking at Adam's, so this obviously came off the back of last week's conversation. We were talking about some of the benefits, but Adam rightly kind of challenged, didn't he, around some of that, particularly around, if you're putting up iPads or something and then suddenly, the learner registers get their iPad and then you don't see them again, which I can imagine is quite the risk. But the questions that he's put through is, question 1, how have you adapted to distance online learning from a reporting, MI, compliance perspective and made sure all evidence is captured as needed? That's quite a big question, isn't it? And Paul, I don't know if maybe you want to start kicking us off on that one, because I think from a provider perspective, that's probably quite apt, isn't it?
Yeah, so from our perspective, we use a system called Apptem, and it like any system, it's only as good as what you put in. So whether that be data or whether that be content. So for us, from an apprenticeship perspective, Apptem allows you to build your program. So essentially the starting point is they will turn on the standard for you. So if we take the junior energy manager, it will have all of the skills, knowledge and behaviors listed. And what we will do is we'll build our program. So our standard program is 18 months. We'll have what we cover in each of those 18 months, so that we get a skeleton program built on the system. And then what we do is we create, you have components and assets within the system. And they might be some learning, they might be some assessment, they might be directing them to other forms of e-learning, etc. And we hold those in a resource library, and then it's literally a drag and drop, so that for each learner, the program build can be different, the content can be different, the order can be different, the content can be different. And then when you build within that, what Apptem automatically does is it logs on the date and time when they're on the system, so it accurately logs the time that they're on that system. If they go away and do a particular task, when they upload that evidence, so that evidence might be a summary, it might be a diary entry, it might be an assignment, it might be a testimony from a line manager, it could be anything. When they upload that evidence, they are prompted to effectively label that evidence, but then they have to put what time they've spent on that particular task. And then it's down to the tutor when that's submitted to decide whether that's appropriate or not. So if someone's done a task and they've said, I spent 30 hours on that, and the tutor looks and thinks, doesn't really justify 30 hours worth of work, they might have a conversation. So Apptem, from that perspective, logs interaction, it logs time on the system, and it also logs time submitted in terms of other pieces of work and so on. From a sign-up process, it has everything built into it. So we are required to only have one signature, and from that point onwards, it's all digital signatures on the system. So if their individual learning plan is updated, it might be because, let's take the current situation, learners are on a break in learning, so their expected end date is changed. They'll be alerted to that. So in the system, it will alert them when they log on. they then have to review the new documents, and they just tick the tick box, say they agree. That imports their digital signature then to update it. So it works really well. And there's probably lots and lots, well, I know there's lots and lots of different aspects of that system that I haven't covered, but it's effectively an e-portfolio, an e-learning, an MIS, and there's also a CRM part to it, all in one. So that's what attracted us most to it.
Yeah.
But then there are other aspects that we use. So now we're using FlexiQuiz. So if I can I share my screen?
Yeah, absolutely. You should be able to. You should have permissions. Yeah.
So I'll give you an example here.
It'd be good to see this because I know you popped it in the chat a couple of weeks ago, didn't you? But we didn't really spend a lot of time on it, so this will be really interesting.
Yeah. So if I quickly go to the dashboard, so here's an example. These are, this is our Intro to Energy course. So what we've done is we've modularized the course into 15 modules, and we've got an end of module assessment for each. I think I also sent out to everyone, and I know Christine came back to me. So we did the OCR initial assessments. So an example, if I open it here, so certainly, Christine, you'll remember this. By the way, Christine,
yes,
thanks for your feedback.
That cases bugged me. It really
this is the question that you challenged, wasn't it, a couple of weeks ago?
Questions I challenged.
So one of the things that, so Christine, just to show you, one of the things that we did, so if I go into this and edit, so just so you're aware, I've now added
oh, bless you.
to the options, okay?
Oh, so you can do that yourself. Well, that's good.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because then the feedback was useful, wasn't it?
So I absolutely, Christine. This is the beauty of this is once you've published it, you can actually just go back in and edit. And this is as per we're using the OCR one here. This is as per the OCR marking guidance. So you'll see, for example, pie and pie chart at the bottom there is worth 1 mark because the marking criteria suggests that if they say pie, you can give them 1 mark because it recognises that they understand that that's one option.
Do you remember the comment I made for this, Erica?
No.
I typed in the answer, and I can't remember what the answer was that I typed in, but it was the correct answer. But when it said it was wrong, and then when it gave me the option, it's just the way you type it. And that's what Paul's just shown. There are that many different combinations.
Got it.
So bar chart, you can have a capital B and a capital C, or a capital B and a lowercase c. Or
got it.
And so it's, if you don't do it exactly as the answers that it gives you the option, then it marks it wrong.
Yeah. So so when you're setting this up in the background, then like you said, you need to have all the different combinations to be able to pick up the answer.
Yeah,
absolutely. And the way in which you configure this is really good. You can have it set on here so that you can set a specific time that they're allowed, whether you allow them to save and continue later. If you wanted to, you could have a bank of questions that let's say you've got a bank of 60 questions, but actually there's only 30 in the quiz or the assessment, then you can randomize the questions and say how many of those questions you want, how many attempts they're allowed to do, if you want to redirect them to another URL afterwards, what they're allowed to do in terms of functions. But I guess...
are you going to change this, Paul? Because you know that OCR is stopping functional skills at the end of this year.
Yes, absolutely. So we're now looking at what we can do with NTFE, because NTFE is going to be the main one that we're going to work with. The gradings then are worked out in accordance to what the marking criteria is as well. The results are then emailed to the learner. You can customize a certificate for what that would look like for them.
So you could do with this with any topic.
Any topic.
Paul? It could be anything. It's just the data that you put into the system that then formulates the quiz and the assessment.
Absolutely. And then
that's really good.
Yeah, it's who the results go to. And so with our staff, they get the results and the PDF of the responses. And I'll show you what that looks like in a moment. If we felt the staff don't need to get a copy of the certificate. And then again, if you want to email the respondent and what they get. and then you customize the email responses that they get. So the staff one here, and then the respondents there. So it's really customizable.
What's the cost to it, Paul?
Sorry?
What's the cost to it?
$192 for the year.
Really? It's not learner based.
So I'll go to, just to show you.
No, because it's not an apprenticeship system, Christine. I think it's just a general. There you go. It's just a general piece of software, isn't it?
$192 per year. It's fantastic. It really is. Yeah. If I go back to the dashboard, and I'll happily, so I'm not breaking any confidentiality. I go to analyze.
American spelling is really starting to bug me. Sorry, just throwing that in.
So I'll show you my example here. So what it does is it's a full PDF then of the test and the answers given, so that you've got your full evidence in terms of what's there. So even to this point, it will show you what the correct answer was compared to the answer that was given. So it's all marked for you.
That's really good, because that's a big bugbear for people using BKSB, isn't it? Because you don't get that level of feedback, from what I understand.
Well, you do. You just need to know where to look for it.
Oh, okay.
People don't take the time to look for it.
Oh, okay.
Because I mean, I've not looked at BKSB for a little while, but they used to do some sophisticated profiling, and you could do things like group profiling, where you could pull off everybody's diagnostic results and look to the topic areas and see where the levels were and who's got, the RAG rating. And I can't believe that they'll have got rid of that, because it was a really useful resource, but people just don't use it.
And then, so obviously you've got, just me there as the administrator, but you can create as many, users as you want to be able to access the account. And then,
so if you're on as a user, then can you just create your own quizzes?
Yeah, and also the beauty of it is once you've set up a quiz, if for example you're going to use the same format, so the same sort of instructions, etc. You just select the action, you just copy the quiz, rename it, and then just change the questions and answers, so that it's very quick and easy to do that. If I just go into the example test and analyze that as well.
How did you find this, Paul? Were you just searching for online?
Yeah, absolutely. So from the point of view of the reporting on this, it shows obviously the scores and the grades, if you want those. It shows when they were sat, but in the full report that I showed before, it also shows the time they've spent on it, so that it's date stamped and it shows the time on it as well. So if they'd done that initial assessment, for example, and it took them 17 minutes, it will say that it started at this time and they spent 17 minutes on it. So it's really useful from that perspective. But yeah, so Erica, I just Googled and I kept looking and looking, and there were lots of different, I'll be honest with you, if I sat down and wanted to write what I wanted a testing stroke assessment tool to do for me, this is pretty much the perfect fit.
Oh, is it? Oh, that's good to know.
Yeah.
I'd not heard of it before you'd mentioned it, so it's really interesting. But like you said, it looks like it's an American program, so maybe it wouldn't be a typical go-to for a lot of providers.
Yeah, exactly. And the sort of testing assessment side of it is only one part. So again, what I really like about it, so if I go into the example one, is I've incorporated video. So you can incorporate video, you can incorporate graphics. I mean, the OCR one that I showed you there, I just used the sniping tool to get the graphics from their PDF version to put it in there. But if you've got your own videos or YouTube or whatever, you can incorporate them. If they're long videos, you can choose when it starts and stops. So you just have a snippet that you want to use for it, which is really good. And again, you can choose whether they have to watch the whole video before they answer the question, or whether they can answer the question, at any point. All of that you can incorporate within the build.
Does this connect into Aptem in any way? Is there any kind of connection or API or anything?
We're having those conversations. So the one thing that I showed you in the configure is when they complete the test, it will automatically, so you can see redirect on quiz completion. So you can get them to redirect. So we're having conversations with Aptem at the moment about how this might work. Simply, if I go to publish, so there is a URL which is fully customizable, by the way. So you can see ours Intro to Energy example test. So in Aptem, we can have the URL obviously embedded there, so they can just click on that. It will take them straight to the assessment quiz, and then we can get the URL that will redirect them back as soon as they.
Oh, that's good.
But what we're looking at is whether or not the results part can automatically be uploaded to Aptem. So we're having those conversations at the moment. Worst case scenario.
Each quiz creates a unique URL for you, does it?
Yes. Yeah. That you can then name yourself. Yeah, absolutely. So each one of ours will be on this Intro to Energy, but module 1, Intro to Energy, module 2, Intro.
And do you know if it's already been used? Does it alert you to that?
We've not come across it, but I think what you'll find is the beginning part of the URL is unique to us.
Right,
so
okay.
If we duplicated it ourselves, that it would alert to it.
Okay.
My understanding.
I think it's important to be able to embed it into your e-portfolio as well, because it saves you a lot of kind of time and effort. And that was when I used Bud at Virgin. We had BKSB talking to Bud, and that was really just a really valuable integration. So you can get things talking to each other. It's really helpful, isn't it?
So for us, there are a number of benefits with this. So it creates more opportunity for the learner to access learning and assessment. It also means that the learner is able to validate their learning and assessment much more readily. It also means that the tutors can very quickly and easily create learning and assessment tools through this. And it means that actually from the tutor's perspective, rather than them having to physically mark, once they've done it up front with the build, it's there for them. So they could be spending their time, utilising their time more effectively in supporting learners in other areas.
That's a really good way of sharing resources and collaborating as well, isn't it? I mean, if you as a team are putting some effort into creating a quiz and other people in the team are doing other quizzes and you can use them all, then you get a much better bank of stuff that everybody can use and makes life a lot easier.
Yeah, absolutely, Christine. And again, you can even, so I showed you where you can copy the tests or assessments, and then you can do the same with the questions. So if you just want to cut and paste a question and put it into another quiz, you can do that as well. So you're right, as you build your resource library up very quickly, you've got lots of resource and lots of content that you can customize as and when you want to. So our next step is understanding the how you build the classes or cohorts and assign them, because in the reporting you can choose, so per quiz, per user, the quiz itself uses all groups, but the group we will call class or cohort, and in the same way as I go to the analyze part, it would show it per class. So it would show for that particular test or assessment who sat it, when they sat it, what their score was, what their grade was. And so again, that's quite effective in terms of participation, interaction, assessment, etc. So this tool's working really well for us.
Does it have like guides and everything that you can follow to work out how the system works, or do you just have to find it out for yourself?
There are some, but I'll be honest with you, I learnt, and it's just my personal learning style, but I just got in, dived in, and that's why I did the example ones first, really tested it, then sent the URL to my personal email, worked it through as a learner, sent it back so I could see from both ends. So I'll be, quite honest. I found this really easy, and equally, I found it really easy to find the mistakes and the errors and then rectify them, because that's as important. Because you might think you've done it well and it's all closed and so on, and you're not able to unpick it. You're able to unpick this really quickly.
I've just put FlexiQuiz into YouTube and there's a bunch of videos on how to use it.
Oh, is there?
Yeah, yeah, and you could subscribe to their channel as well by the looks of things.
Okay.
Awesome. Okay. I think that's a really good piece of software, Paul. Thank you for sharing that. How long have you been using that for?
Well, you can see on there, so about a month, just over a month.
Oh, okay, so it's still quite new to you. Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. But we've had our first cohorts going through it on AEB. In fact, the meeting I had just before this, and that's why I apologize I was slightly late, was with our GEM, one of our GEM tutors, to talk about how we're developing FlexiQuiz for the apprenticeship side now.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Oh, fantastic. So it'd be interesting to understand how this works in the assessment world, because for knowledge tests and things like that as part of endpoint assessment, Linda, what do you use a piece of software similar to that?
Yeah, I mean, it sort of depends on the assessment plan, and I think one of the things that we're noticing with a lot of the new assessment plans is actually the multiple choice test is not necessarily flavour of the month. Which I sort of agree with, because I certainly think when you get to higher levels, how good is it really at checking knowledge and understanding and that application of learning as well? But any endpoint assessment organisation, you have to have the capacity, obviously, to design tests in whatever format the assessment plan asks for. And so most AO, EPAOs have either a bespoke testing platform or they go out and buy one. Now, we're actually in talks at the moment with Sirius, which is a Dutch-based company and has a testing platform, and Procterio, because obviously we want to be able to do and combine the remote assessment. So this system is built in that you can do, if you like, remote assessments, and so you're videoing them all the way through, and there's various sort of pinch points and you know what to look for, etc., as well. Or you can do invigilation, if you like, it in the standard way. But in many ways it's very similar to what Paul has just described. I suppose the slight difference might be that the number of security issues and checks we would have to put in, because obviously as an endpoint assessment organisation, you've got to be able to have a sufficient bank of questions, retire them, but you've got to protect and secure those questions as well. But in essence, every endpoint assessment organisation / awarding organisation would have software that allows them to do that, and also gives them all of the analytics. So I think possibly the slight difference is, and again, I don't know what the reporting is on what Paul's just shown, but we would have to have a breakdown of every test, how well questions perform, how individuals perform, how individual standards perform, how maybe cohorts perform, how, you know, certain apprentices with certain providers or employers perform as well. So in some ways, for us, it's also demonstrating the analytics and the suitability and the validity of the questions. As well, where if you're a training provider, you should sort of be doing that, but I suppose you could be you could be a little bit more forgiving if that wasn't quite right. Does that make
it's part of the learning program effectively, isn't it? So
but I think, you know, MCQs or quizzes, I think, are a good way of developing memory. And so one of the things that we're looking to do, even if the assessment plan doesn't require a knowledge test in that format, and again our testing platform does things like video, audio, and all of those sorts of things, you know, written questions, but is actually maybe developing practice questions for people, because just quick and dirty, you know, if you've only got 5 minutes but it's just a quick memory jog, that can be a really good way of just helping the learning stick. So I think there's real value to that, I suppose, because I am ex-training provider, and I think one of the big things I've always railed against is, why are you measuring time? You should be measuring results. But given that that argument has not been won, I suppose the big thing for training providers is, can you distinguish between learning, assessment for learning, and just assessment? Because I think when they're talking about measuring, they're talking about measuring of learning. And where Paul's got quite a sophisticated system, I guess the starting point is you've got to have a good scheme of work. and you've got to know what really, you know, the amount of time you would expect the, I hate the term average, but the average apprentice to spend on that, because that's almost your benchmark. And if you haven't got that, you can have a brilliant process, but if your scheme of work's a pig, your process is just going to be a pig with lipstick on, even if you've gone online. If you haven't got that base, it's very technical terms, obviously.
I've got all sorts of things in my head.
If you haven't got that basis as well. So I think that's going to be, in part, what training providers really need to make sure when they're being audited. This is the scheme of work. This is how we've mapped it out. This is how we expect the apprentice to engage. And really trying to trap all of that time. And I think the danger is if you just rely on self-reporting, because if you've got to attribute 20%, I know from working with some apprentices, if you relied on their self-reporting, you be getting about 20 minutes a month. So I think that's the other thing as well, that training providers have really got to have a way of combining how do you report usage as well. And if you're doing self-managed learning, is that counted as learning? Probably not. Yeah, and because it's got to be done within the work time, So I think the slicker your process, the better. But yeah, I think that worries a lot of training providers still. I think they're still grappling with that. And in some cases, they're expecting a system to do it all for them. And it's still not going to do everything for you. You've still got to think the whole process through, and you know, in a way that Paul's actually describing, and say, well, you know, will this work with this, and can we API with this? And I think my experience sometimes has been, when I've commissioned such work, is that you are sold the world. It can do everything, pretty much make cups of tea. I mean, now I'm sort of, you know, older and grizzled and far more cynical, but I think, again, quite a lot of training providers have been burnt as well in that way. And I think that's another piece. In some cases, they don't exactly know what to ask for, and they're not open enough to maybe ask somebody else, what should we be asking for? And they're sold a pup. And they've spent a lot of money on it, and then they've got a system that, in effect, doesn't do what they need it to do.
But I think even if you are sold something which has got bells and whistles, and it will do everything that you want it to do, it can be fine until people start to work with it. And the outcomes you will get from the system are only as good and as committed as the people that are wanting to work with it. And I think that's part of, you know, my thoughts around what Paul was saying and Adam's question. You know, some people are using the online stuff as a quick fix, and almost the system will do it, so I don't need to. Mm-hmm. And so they'll push people towards doing that, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the level of input is getting in there. And then there's the other side as well, is that people have used online because they've had to, but they're still not comfortable with it, so they'll just go back to the old way anyway. And I just think I think it's a very challenging space, full stop. And I'm not sure recording is effective whether people do online or face-to-face, because if recording of data for the MI and all the rest of it, if that was as accurate as it needed to be, why would there be so many problems with ESFA audits and extrapolation? You know, people don't record what needs to be recorded. End of.
Mm-hmm.
I think just something, it's Jackie here, just something else to pick up on what Linda was saying as well. Because I noticed, obviously, the one you were showing earlier is an American one, because you buy it in dollars and stuff. Just be mindful of what you're collecting and using it for, because America and Canada have very different data protection rules. And I remember when I was at an EPAO, when we were looking at different systems we can use, and data that you collect for delivering endpoint assessment, which includes apprentice details. They have very different rules, and you don't want to fall foul of data protection rules because you're using a system that can not follow the UK rules, if that makes sense.
No, I picked up on that as well, Jackie, because I think a lot depends on where it's being hosted as well, doesn't it?
Yes, because a lot of companies host in Canada because it has much more relaxed rules or something. I'm not an IT person, but I've heard many people say we host it in Canada in terms of the servers because it's got different rules on how you protect and use data. So just to be mindful of it. I can't tell you because I'm not an IT person in the slightest. I've just seen and heard conversations around that. So if you are using it in collecting anything that's remotely personal data in any form, you just need to make sure you're covered.
No, that's spot on, Jackie, because I didn't ask that question, but certainly my business development director, when I was, because I'm always like, oh, this is fantastic. Linda, where's the servers?
Yeah.
Where's it based from and stuff as well. I'm like, oh, so actually I said, well, you better go and ask them. And he did, because so that was his immediate, the system might be great, but actually have you thought of GDPR, Linda? Which, because of course he knew I probably wouldn't have thought of that in its fullest extent as well. So yeah, it is something that we are checked on as well. So yeah.
Well, you have to be, because otherwise you could potentially get massive fines from the ICO.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think online learning means so many different things to so many people as well. And I think that's probably, going back to your point, Christine, it's been a battle for training providers to actually understand, and to your point, Linda, around what people are asking for as well, and what they understand when they are buying stuff, because online learning to me probably means very different things to online learning to you guys or somebody else. So a lot of work that I've been doing has been in the digital space around that tutor-led online learning through virtual classrooms. And I was just going to share with you a slide, like a part of a deck that I was working with a provider this week, actually. And we were talking about, can you see that okay, using virtual classrooms as your anchors? Yeah. And this was the kind of, they wanted a framework to be able to look at all of their design of their programs and their build of their programs without kind of, like you guys have said, sticking someone on a system and saying, see you later, good luck with your learning, which I think a lot of providers initially first did. And I know through talking to other providers, that on previous inspections where they've done that with BKSB and their functional skills, and there's been no tutor interaction, and Ofsted have really hammered them for it because there's no tutor interactions. Whereas you can actually build a really nice framework, like something like that on the screen, where you're using your tutor-led, but also your self-study piece. It's just having your framework and your understanding of how that could sit, and you're capturing all your, learning outcomes as part of that. So actually doing your awareness in this piece here, in terms of your pre-work, your pre-reads, your videos, your joining instructions, they're sitting down with their manager objective settings. They can bring that into a virtual classroom, which is almost like that flipped classroom kind of structure. So they bring their knowledge and awareness into the virtual classroom. And this is quite alien for a lot of tutors and a lot of training providers. The virtual classroom is used just to facilitate and consolidate the learning, rather than just telling the learning, which we perhaps traditionally would do in more of a workshop setting, particularly those tutors who've been subject matter experts as well. So I'm doing a bit of work with providers around just understanding what their overall programs look like at the moment, so they don't get caught out, and actually they don't leave their learners behind, because it's not motivating sitting having to do self-study and read and e-learning all the time, particularly if you're somebody who likes the social interaction and you want to be able to be part of a group and you miss that workshop type experience. So that, for me, when you say online learning, for me, that's what comes to mind, but I know that's very different for a lot of people, really, and different ways of online learning have their own different challenges.
I think that is a really, really nice model, Erica, and I think, as you've quite rightly said, it's flipped learning, but it's using it in virtual instead of face-to-face in the classroom. And I think where providers maybe could miss a trick is one of the things that does get spoken about quite a lot with providers who work with learners on a one-to-one setting, and oh, well, it's all very well doing that, you can do that in a class, but I can't get people coming into a class. But actually you could use the fact that they are isolated, you could put them into virtual classes and you could manage the learning process so much more effectively and enrich the learning that the learner is actually engaging with, because they will have that interaction. And because And even if you've got a learner that is a little bit disengaged and maybe not very highly motivated, if you're putting them into a class with somebody else, they'll very quickly learn that if they don't do the pre-work or in between work, they're going to get left behind, and they won't like that. So that can make them, you know, step up to the plate, because you're putting them in that peer environment. So I think it's a nice way of moving the flipped learning onto a virtual platform.
And there's definitely a correlation at the moment with providers who've invested in this kind of support and seeing the progress from their learners who are getting that live interactive support, particularly in a group setting, compared to those providers that perhaps decided that they didn't want to invest in that in any way, or they just put everybody on a break in learning because it went in the too difficult box. So the term, I think, is really quite interesting at the moment. When you say online learning or digital learning to people, it means lots of different things. Which kind of probably starts to play into Adam's second question, just aware of time. As always, we've kind of spent a lot of time talking about stuff. I think, and this is what Adam was angling at, I think, on the last call, potentially, is the main barriers to rolling out the online learning in a larger scale. Ours has been capacity-based rather than lack of learners. So again, Paul, it might be interesting to hear from you. I don't know, either on apprenticeships or AAB or whatever. Do you have problems with learners accessing programs digitally? Do you have problems with learners with their, you know, not having internet, laptop, iPhone, smartphones? You know, have you come up across that? And if you have, how have you kind of thought about it or dealt with it? Or you just unmute? Or you just unmute, Paul? Let me just unmute you. There you go.
Yeah, on the apprenticeship side, currently for us, less so. I think it's fair to say the majority of our employers, all bar two, are levy, and are, you know, large organisations, local authorities, NHS trusts, etc., and are in positions where they have access to the technology. I think we've had one or two issues with accessibility in terms of through whatever restrictions there are on internet, and we've managed to overcome that. That was mainly to do with whether we're able to use Zoom or Teams, for example, so on the live sessions. On the AEB side, absolutely, there are far more issues with accessibility, and that's whether because the individuals don't own the technology and therefore don't have accessibility to that technology, or I should say, don't know how to use it. And that's where Christine and I have had the conversations with digital literacy. It was really interesting, actually. I was reading a piece earlier this week, and I'm trying to remember who it was by, but it was a really engaging piece where it talked about how we're moving forward and how we've all had to embrace technology. And it was talking about from an employability perspective. But it was saying, why would we have an individual or get an individual to get on, for example, 2 buses, to have to go to a job centre, to do an assessment, to see whether they're eligible for a particular programme, to then be sent days later on another couple of buses to go to a provider, to do another assessment, to then maybe access that support and have to attend that provider. And equally, why does that provider have to invest in those premises, etc., and the costs of that? Why could those costs not be invested in supplying the technology in the first place that allows this to happen instead? Far more beneficial, far more cost effective, far more time effective in terms of all parties. So the question there is, and Adam raises a really good point, you know, we're not just going to supply everyone with iPads in the hope that, you know, we're going to get them back when we want them back. So how do you do that? But I'm pretty certain, and it's something that actually I've taken away to look at, that there are cheap, effective ways to provide the technology so that individuals can access and it be locked down. So, you know, it will be in form, and again, I'm not an IT expert, but, you know, that tablet can only access an intranet system, for example, where everything is locked down. so they can't use it for anything else. So it doesn't have any other usage. So yes, there's bound to be some losses there, some risks there, but I think you can minimize those risks, and I think it's definitely worth looking at that. But the other side of it is, and this is again coming back to the conversation myself and Christine were having, was how do you provide the training in the first place for those individuals to be able to use that technology effectively? And that's a real challenge, I think, to be able to do that, particularly where we might be restricted, as we have been, to be able to do that. And then the wider context, so as I said, don't currently suffer with this, but I am more than aware of restrictions within certain sectors. Now, whether that be because of accessibility or whether that be because of restrictions. So examples are in care settings, particularly say childcare settings, you are very restricted in the use of technology. So in terms of mobile phones, tablets, etc., things.
Prisons is another one, I suppose, isn't it? Yeah,
another one, absolutely. Or whereby the job doesn't allow it. So an example is logistics. The logistics sector. How feasible is it really for drivers, for example, to be able to access that technology on an ongoing basis? How realistic is it for the employer to allow that time, and so on. So there are certain challenges for certain sectors in terms of the accessibility, but that's probably more, as well as the technology, it's more on the time or restriction side as well. So I think it's definitely not a one size fits all, and it certainly needs to be looked at individually per employer, per sector, per job role as to how that can work.
Do you not think though that it's almost it needs to be a solution-based approach rather than the question, like Adam asked the question, if we gave everybody laptops or iPads or whatever, then they'd disappear. Do they know that? Have they tried it? And it's taking that risk, isn't it? So okay, with a cohort of people, we're going to do X, Y, and Z, because the kind of blended model that Erica was showing us, you could actually, and we talked last week about, if you're saving hotels, if you're saving on travel,
absolutely,
that even in 1 month, you could easily potentially save £200 for a learner on a travel, and over a period of a year, 2 years, 15, whatever period of the program, that actually mounts up as quite a lot of money. So is it just about rechanneling that and like, right, okay, we'll with this cohort, but then sometimes you might be hiring a hotel to bring a class together. You don't have to do that virtually. And if you've got tutors not driving hours and hours to be able to see somebody, then you could use that tutor time more effectively in virtual classes. And it's about channeling and reportioning this money, because that's gone anyway. It's dead money anyway. So if you're spending £2,000 on an assessor just to support a learner, then that's dead money. So it could just go into an iPad, or and then it's a different, yes it's gone, but it's dead money anyway.
Especially if you build your costs for that up front as well, so your first couple of months or whatever it might be. And actually you can get cheap tablets from Tesco for 50 quid, can't you? So it doesn't need to be a 400 quid iPad.
No, not at all. And if you're only using it for that kind of thing, at the end of the day, you don't want to be spending a fortune, do you? Because it's got a risk anyway.
I think again, all of this is just providers thinking in different ways. It's the creativity, it's the critical thinking, it's that skill set that perhaps a lot of leaders in the industry don't always have to kind of flex that grey matter. And I think you've got your leading providers, your providers that kind of grasp the challenge and said, okay, we will recognise this, we recognise the risk, we have to think in a different way. The fact, Paul's obviously done that very clearly. And then you've got some providers who just kind of will always say, but this might happen, but this might happen, but here's a problem, but here's a problem. I'm not saying that's what Adam's done at all. I think Adam's asked some really good critical questions, but I think sometimes you just need to your point, Christine, you just need to try something different and go out on a limb sometimes, don't you, to make it work.
And interestingly, isn't it, Adam's got a meeting, hasn't he, with an awarding organisation. So again, I go back to my time when we worked with several awarding organisations, but would be considered very good clients, because if you're a big national training provider, well, we used to do deals. It used to be, I mean, again, it's all about partnership and collaboration, but what can your suppliers do for you?
That's a good point.
It's that added value as well. Yeah. So I mean, I always say, if you don't ask, you won't get. So what's the worst they're going to say is no. We're not prepared to do that, or we're not prepared. But this was several years ago, and we did get not the best tablets in the world, but we got it was actually for the employability program. We got it. And it was a sort of done as a sponsorship deal as well. But they got their money and their cut as well. So I think again, providers perhaps need to think about that as well, because in some ways they're in very good positions. If you're a good provider, moving forward, training is always going to be needed. So actually suppliers are going to be attracted to you, but I don't think sometimes providers see themselves like that as well. I mean, I think at the moment there's a wealth of opportunities for good training providers as well. And I think if you like, the supporting mechanisms will see that. And certainly the big awarding organisations, that they are looking to do that. I look at NCFE, who are doing free endpoint assessment assessments in the NHS. They are looking to do deals for the future. And I think that's perhaps as well sometimes what training providers need to ask is, well, what can you do for us? This is the new game, so what are you doing to help us do this? If you want our money, how can you help us do that? And I think there will be people that would actually listen to that sort of negotiation.
There's the other side as well, though, isn't there, Linda? In that, the digital skills, there is a skill gap. So the government is funding now for essential digital skills. So potentially councils will be wanting to support the development of adults in their areas. So maybe there's pots of money that providers could tap into that would help to support getting the equipment for people to be able to use to do these courses.
Absolutely.
Or large employers like the NHS, they've got big training budgets, they've got huge amounts of staff that they want to put through these kind of programs. Would they co-fund some equipment in order to be able to do this, because it would be better for their learners? And then would the learners maybe have more respect for the equipment because it's not been given to them as such, it's part of what maybe goes on with their apprenticeship. So I think you're absolutely right, Linda. It's about creativity and having those questions, and like you said, Erica, thinking outside the box, taking those chances.
Well, you used to give them a folder, didn't you? And a portfolio. I mean, it all should be, well, if you will give them that, if you like, a tablet is your new folder. That's a really good point. That's what it is, because that's in some ways what they've got to have as well. And nobody would have thought twice about that was standard issue almost. So I think again it's about, well, this has to be standard issue.
I think this is all part of the evolution. I agree. Where as leaders, we're in a very different space compared to where we were even just 6 months ago. And if you look at it from a risk assessment perspective, my risk register hasn't really changed that much. I didn't have a COVID-19 line on my register, but I had a pandemic line. It's just got a specific title for this current climate. But and yes, you would have your risks around supply of equipment, for example, just like I'd have risk assessments for supply of venues, just like I'd have risk assessments for staff traveling. And coming back to Christine's point about costs, and yeah, absolutely. Most of us have been in this arena for a long enough time to remember when e-portfolios first came on the scene, and then there was a cost associated with that we hadn't had before. but we somehow managed to absorb that cost and accept that cost and move forward. And I agree, you know, from my perspective, and we've done this, we've looked at our costings for sending a tutor down to London who may have to then stay a night or two, looked at the travel cost, looked at the mileage, and then looked at, and that's just been accepted, and quite rightly so. You would sign that off. And in the same way as Linda just said, you would sign off whether, you know, whatever stationery, folders, etc. you'd have for each individual. So I think we just need to change our mindset that if a tablet costs, for example, 50 quid, 60 quid, then that's just a cost in our cost model. If we get that back and we can reuse it, then that's great. But if our mindset to begin with is it's just a cost associated with that learner, and we assume that we can't use that or recycle that again, then we move forward with that model. But if we are able to, and that's what I'm looking at, is how we can use those tablets, and we might have to, you know, reformat them, wipe them clean, get them out again, and we're looking at what IT solutions there are available to do that, then that's great. And that fits in more with our ethos around recycling and so on anyway. But again, you're absolutely right. If it's something that the individual can then take away and use, and it's going to benefit them, whether that be through job search or whether that be through further learning or whatever, and you can absorb that cost in your cost model, then why wouldn't you? And I think, as I said, you know, we need to be in a different space now. We need to be looking at things differently. And absolutely, all, you know, a lot of it comes down to cost. I accept that. And Linda, I'm so pleased to hear you say that. I've lived by, if you don't ask, you don't get, for many, many years. And yes, absolutely, there is going to be lots of opportunities out there now for us to be able to do that. And, you know, you can look at it in other areas. You know, it was Barclays, wasn't it, first of all, with the biking scheme in London. You know, no one really is going to steal one of those bikes. You know, and I know that there are security things in place for that. But the point is it was a great exercise for Barclays, great branding, great partnership. It's worked really well. And I'm sure that there will be similar opportunities if we as a sector embraced it with organisations where you can get the supply, maybe not free, but certainly at a lower cost, where it's going to benefit both parties or all parties.
I've worked for big employers as well. Yeah, I've worked for big employers who change their machines every 2 years, 3 years, because they're not quite perhaps at the level that the corporate L&D team need or whatever, and they just raffle them off for 50 quid. And you're talking hundreds of tablets and laptops. So, you know, if you've got a big employer, or if you were to write to someone like Barclays or whoever to say, next time you're changing your kit, can you let me know, because I want to buy 200 laptops off you, or whatever it might be. Again, it's just different ways of thinking about stuff, isn't it? And to Adam's final question, I'm just aware of time, around how have you been quality assuring the online content that's been used and made sure it's fit for purpose. You do what you've always done, because you're delivering learning materials and you're delivering training, just because it's through a different methodology. And actually, you know, there are some principles that sit around online design, which is slightly different to face-to-face. But, you know, it's again, you're still doing observations, and actually you can record a lot easier now through this compared to what you used to be able to do. So again, back to the message, just because it's got digital written in front of it now or online versus, you know, it used to be face-to-face, it's almost like it scared people a little bit, isn't it, into just kind of not quite thinking and putting common sense against it. I think it's easier to quality assure online learning compared to face-to-face personally. So
I agree. I think it's just about mindset again. And I remember many years ago talking about from an audit perspective. And I said, for auditors, if 20% of their time is spent policing and 80% of their time is spent supporting, then they've got that balance right. But if 80% of their time is policing and 20% is supportive, then it's totally wrong. And the same way as entering into this digital space and around quality assurance, I know that's separate to audit, their mindset has to change, accepting that it's something new. So don't take your existing regime and use the technology to accept that it's new. So therefore accept that it's not going to be perfect. There's going to be tweaks and changes needed, and therefore focus more on the feedback from the end user. And that's what we're
be agile. Yeah,
absolutely. And be open. So we've been open with the first cohorts. This is something new for us. We're really embracing it. We want you to do the same, but we want to be open with you. So we know that there's probably going to be mistakes. It's not going to be perfect, but we want your feedback. What's worked well for you? What hasn't worked well for you? And then share that with them. So where you've made, so just like I did very quickly with Christine today, thanks very much, Christine, for the feedback. I've put it in place and it's going to make a difference for anyone moving forward. And it has to be the same with your quality assurance approach for something that's new. You know, absolutely, you want to make sure that it's the best possible, but be really open about it. Don't be judgmental. Don't be, you know, too focused on the policing. Make sure that what your quality assurance regime is doing is making sure that ultimately you're getting the best out of it and it's fit for purpose for everyone at the end.
Well, it's the impact, isn't it? That's what, in terms of quality assurance, that the key measure is what was the impact on that individual learner or learners. That has got to be the best message. And I always think, because quality assurers are people as well, just because you think a particular piece of learning is amazing, and it may well be amazing for you, actually your judgment call is what was the impact. And I think what quality assurance will need to do is be far more having those sorts of discussions as well, and be much more consistent and stringent about collecting and collating learner and employer feedback around that particular area. And I think being really good at getting that starting point. So I think, again, what will help quality assurance is, have you got really good metrics for your initial assessment? And is it very clear to both the learner and the employer what the starting point was? And as a quality assurer, are you then developing people, but also measuring that progress along the line as well? And then you've you've tied in beautifully then into the EIF, because you've got your intent, your implementation, and your impact. And really, that's what quality assurance should be focused on. I think it's, and I agree with you, Erica, it's what you've always done. It shouldn't be that different, whether you're using, chalk, or whether you're using a piece of kit. It's, can they do what you wanted them to do and what they wanted to do as a result of that intervention?
Yeah, and the investment to get there, to get that quality up, is in the design and the delivery of the learning. It's not around, do I quality assure in a different way?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah. Agreed. Have we come to a natural close?
I think so.
It feels like it, doesn't it? So I'm just going to go back to Adam's questions, because I want to make sure we do them justice, because it was really good of him to put them forwards and take the time to do that. So how have you adapted to the distance online learning from a reporting, MI, compliance perspective, and made sure all evidence is captured as needed? Well, Paul, you were talking us around your end-to-end system, and particularly around your flexi quiz, that I think was a good option and a good example of that, and how that could be agile and used in different ways. And then Linda, you were talking about exams from an assessment perspective and using different software for that. So I think we've answered that question, have we? Yeah,
I think in part I'm giving some examples. I think you can never give a complete answer to that, because there'll be so many different examples.
So it depends on the program, doesn't it? Yeah. And the scheme of work, and what is acceptable or expected evidence as well. So I think that's something, again, that you have to work out as a provider. That's part of your process and your organisation of learning and assessment.
And the commitment of the people that are working with the system.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay. Question 2, what have been the main barriers to rolling out online learning on a larger scale? So I think we talked around engagement, we talked around tech, we talked about costs to maybe enable that, thinking in a different way, thinking creatively, mindset. Anything else we want to add to that?
No, accessibility really as well. That all sits in cost, I suppose.
Again, that mindset piece, isn't it? Like you said, if you're going to spend 200 quid on printing paper, you might as well spend 200 quid on 4 laptops or tablets or whatever. 2 laptops or 4 tablets. Yeah. Okay. Question 3: how have you been quality assuring the online content that has been used and made sure it's fit for purpose? I think we kind of landed in a place that it's not the quality assurance that particularly change, it's the design and delivery of the learning and seeing that in a slightly different way, isn't it? Are we happy we've answered Adam's questions?
I think so, but whether Adam will be happy.
Adam, get back to us. Let us know if you've got this
far.
far.
Some food for thought as well, because there isn't a definitive answer, is there, as well? But yeah, we've given him some food for thought, and he can either say, "Yep, that seems sensible," or "What were they on when they were discussing this?"
And I know Joanna from Buds also mentioned, you know, that obviously from a Bud perspective, this is a particularly pertinent conversation, and she's introduced Jessie Johnson from Bud as well into the group by the looks of things. So no doubt, Joanna and Jessie, if you've watched this, do come back to us with your thoughts as well, and anyone else as well. So brilliant. Thank you, guys. Really good conversation, really productive conversation. Once we got our belly laughs out the way at the beginning, I think we were very serious and grown up about it. So thank you for that. We can go back to being silly now.
I can get my bunny ears out again then, can I?
Oh, Christine, can we get that in your photo, in your LinkedIn photo? That would be brilliant.
No, but I have got a Tigger here, if that helps.
So yeah, so it'd be good, I think, maybe just to think about what our topic needs to be next week. Does it need a continuous conversation? It'll be good to see if there's any kind of thoughts or feedback on anyone who's watched the recording today and wants to pick up on the conversation next week. And again, you know, I think it's important that we're sharing those updates of what we're learning, what our challenges are, and when we come back and say, actually, this is my challenge, this is how I dealt with it, and this is who you can go and speak to. I think, you know, Paul and I talk about that quite a lot, don't we, Paul, in regards to the value of this call. So yeah, okay. Thank you very much for joining today, guys. Appreciate we're slightly over time. I think Jackie's scooted off, so she's obviously got another call. So, but thank you. And Linda, hope to see you on camera next week.
Well, actually, they've just been knocking at the door. I think it might be bad news for the faithful laptop and stuff as well. So that's why I suddenly went on mute, because they're going, no, don't go in, don't go in.
Oh, okay. Well, I look forward to hearing the next stage of the saga next Thursday.
All right. Have a good day, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Take care. Bye. Bye.